Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the GAA Lean Body Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane, strength and conditioning coach and sports nutritionist, here to help you with all things GAA related fitness. Today's podcast, we are going to talk about training, so crafting a perfect gym program for you as a GAA player, so maximizing strength, body composition, and performance. I'm going to take this podcast from a slightly different angle and talk about how you can design your own gym program or your own program based on your goals and the time of the season. So there's a lot of focuses that I've discussed on previous episodes of the podcast, from performance to building muscle to shedding unwanted fat to enhancing overall fitness and strength, and a well-designed gym program is essential for that. Now, one of the misconceptions that you've probably heard, not if you're listening to this podcast, but you've heard it from other coaches, is that you have to pick one goal and focus all of your attention on that. Now, that is a good piece of advice in regards to creating your own program. But if you have the knowledge and the education and you give yourself a little bit of runway with trial and error in terms of a timeline, you can actually hit multiple goals at once. A lot of coaches will tell you should focus on strength or focus on speed. Or if your goal is body composition, you should focus on building muscle or focus on losing body fat and not try to overlap those goals. You can hit multiple goals provided you have the correct program. Now, you normally have to overlap this with nutrition and make sure your nutrition feeds into the training. One of the reasons that I don't design standalone, and historically have never designed standalone nutritional plans or gym programs for people, is you need to know what training you're doing to design a nutritional plan for it, and you need to know how somebody is eating so that you're able to optimize for the program. So if you have an ultra endurance runner or a marathon runner, you can potentially go very high fat with those people. Whereas if you have a hurler or a footballer or a ladies footballer or a camogie player, you generally want to go a little bit higher carb, or at least cycle your carbs, because you're in that glycolytic based sport. So I'm not going to spend time talking about the nutrition in today's podcast. I'm going to assume that you either are looking after that yourself, or you're working with a coach, or you're potentially coming through my GAA Lean Body program, or even listen to other episodes where that was the primary focus. Today we're going to focus on the training side. So optimizing gym days. Balancing training time between the gym and pitch session is crucial to prevent overtraining and maximize results, regardless of what time of the season it is. In pre-season, mid-season, off-season, you always want to get this balance right. And I always think of it like a curve or going up a pyramid. At the beginning of the season, if you think of your off season as the start, you can do way more gym work because you're not on the pitch. You can do 4 gym sessions a week, 5 gym sessions a week, potentially sometimes 6 gym sessions a week, depending on your structured program. I generally don't recommend that to the majority of players, but some will get away with it depending on what they're prioritizing in their actual gym workouts, i.e. they're going in and doing a lot of hypertrophy or bodybuilding style workouts that just don't take as long to recover from. So you could potentially do 6 of those a week, but they won't improve your performance on the pitch, but they'll improve your body composition. Whereas if you're doing a strength and conditioning program, something like my GAA Lean Body program, or you're following a high intensity style training like CrossFit, you're not going to be able to do that 6 days a week and have good sessions every single time. Even if you are brilliant with your sleep and brilliant with your nutrition, your body just needs a certain level of recovery that is dependent on the training program you're following. So as a general guideline, you generally want to go 3 to 4 days a week in the gym to allow adequate recovery between workouts in the middle of a season. And then, as I mentioned, in the off season, you can taper that up. When you come into championship and when you're trying to prioritize, this could drop down as low as 2 sessions per week. I've historically had some of my players only do the GAA Lean Body program 2 days a week in the lead up to championship, and we all also taper that back. So we'll do those sessions at about 70% so that they're able to peak for a Saturday or Sunday for a championship game. So it's a little bit of trial and error if you're designing this yourself. And then your programming, which I'll get into next, becomes important. But you also want to ensure you're prioritizing rest days before and after those really intense sessions. So if you've got a leg day that's exceptionally intense, you might want to back off the next day, or you might want to have a rest day the day before. If you have a championship game or something that's taking a lot of physical energy, you might want to back off again the day before, the day after. Experimenting with this is important. Now, if you have secondary goals outside of performance for a game, you want to design your program around that. So now we're going to talk about the goal-orientated workout system. So when I think of goals for GAA players, there's normally 3 that are the main focus: building muscle, getting stronger, and they kind of overlap, and I'll talk about that in a second. Losing body fat or reducing body fat is number 2, and then enhancing endurance, stamina, performance, and overall fitness is number 3. Not in priority of order, but they're the 3 that you see most often. With muscle being a goal, and to build muscle and to enhance strength, you have to implement a resistance training program and focus it on your compound lifts ideally. One of the biggest misconceptions I had as a young GAA player was that weights slow you down. And that has thankfully been challenged and disproven massively over the last 5 or 10 years, but some players still have it. It's why you'll hear coaches telling you to slam and smash your gym workout in January, February in preseason, and then they'll be like, oh, well, get out of the gym now, we've got games coming up. And if anything, it's the reverse. You build your base in the off season and the preseason, and then you maintain it in the middle of the season. This is where speed work and doing direct glute work and doing explosive work or overspeed training where you're actually focusing on speed, that's what you do in the off season. That's what you do in the preseason, and then in the middle of the season you maintain it. Because what happens with a lot of players with something like a speed goal is they get faster while they're on the program, something like my program, the GAA Lean Body program, the different versions of that, or other coaches' programs, and then they stop doing it and they go back to what's called regressing to the mean. They go back to their normal speed because they didn't maintain it. Building muscle can be quite similar. You can build that muscle and strength in the off season and in the preseason, and if you stop doing the resistance, you're going to lose it coming into the middle of the year, which is not what you want to happen. So look at your compound lifts, engage multiple muscle groups simultaneously, so maximize that growth potential, and then incorporate your squats, maybe some deadlifts. I like trap bar deadlifts for GAA players. Bench presses, overhead presses, pull-ups, rows, all of these are great compound lifts. So if you're going with a muscle building goal, you'd normally have a hypertrophy parameter training range. So that's 3 to 4 sets on each exercise. That's 8 to 10 reps per set, and you're using a weight that you're failing at 8 to 10 reps. Now, the problem with hypertrophy and with muscle building programs is that is what the goal is for. It doesn't take into account that you're an athlete who's going to be twisting and turning, and you also have to have performance. So how I lay out my GAA Lean Body program, and you can do something similar, is we have the hypertrophy phase at the beginning of a training slot. So it's a 5-day program, depending on the version of the program you're on, depending on your position, depending on your sport, depending on your goals. But all of them are designed in this structure. Hypertrophy at the beginning, your strength and conditioning element in the middle, and then normally high level conditioning at the end, depending on the goal. There's less of that if your goal obviously is to build muscle and get stronger. There's more of it if your goal is to get your body composition to a certain level and get body fat down. So keep that in mind, that you don't want to design an entire program around hypertrophy, around bodybuilding. Although those compound lifts are great, you're not a bodybuilder, you're a GAA player. So use the best of that world with building muscle and the most scientifically supported rep ranges and parameters to work within with those challenging weights so that you can build that muscle and build that strength. But also keep in mind you need to do some functional movements alongside it. The next one then is losing fat. So combining cardiovascular exercises with resistance training massively helps with fat reduction. It works in kind of 2 ways. If you think of your building muscle mass, and just to touch on strength, you drop your rep ranges down slightly, but I'll keep it focused on muscle mass here because there's an overlap with strength and muscle building. There's so much of both going on if you're using the correct weight. So if you're using a weight that you're failing in 8 rep ranges, or 8 reps for squats, for example, with say 20 kilos, you can't do 9 or 10, you're failing at 8. You're going to get muscle increase and hypertrophy from that, but you're also going to get strength increase from that. So that's why I'm not focusing heavily purely on the strength parameters, which would be lower rep ranges, 5 reps all the way down to 1 rep maxes, which again, I'm not a fan of personally as a strength and conditioning coach, but some coaches do if that's part of their training phase and program. With losing body fat, building muscle works because of the challenging element of it. When you tear muscle fibers down, you're putting your body under quite an increased stress. And that stress response is what allows you to grow. But also when you're working for challenging weights where you're failing at 8 to 10 reps, you're also going to increase your metabolic rate, which means you'll burn more calories while you're resting. So even though your goal might be fat loss, doing the resistance training can actually massively support that fat reduction through the increase in metabolic rate, i.e. you're boosting your metabolism. But also including high intensity interval training sessions in your gym routine. Like high intensity interval training, you tend to have cardio broken into 2 forms. Your LIST, which is low intensity steady state. If you think of your long jogs in preseason, that's low intensity steady state. It's building up an aerobic base before you do sprints. And then your high intensity interval training or your sprint training, your 20 meters or your 30 meter sprints that you do at the start or the end of gym sessions or pitch sessions. But you can mimic this in the gym as well. You can use a treadmill if you want to keep it very sport specific, where you're doing sprints on a treadmill. Or if you have a history of injuries where you want to keep the impact lower because you're an older athlete, maybe you'll do something more low impact, bike sprints or assault bike sprints, or even sprints on a rower. So I'm a big fan of things like 30-30, which is a 30-second sprint, 30-second recovery with a 5 rounds or 10 rounds depending on your level of fitness. So HIIT, as I mentioned, involves those short bursts of intense exercise followed by a brief recovery time. So the two recovery approaches is either completely stopping and catching your breath or going to a very low intensity. So a cross trainer is a good example of a low intensity version where you sprint for 30 seconds and then you just move for 30 seconds. An assault bike might be similar. And whereas something like a treadmill, because of the speed setting, you're probably going to jump off the treadmill and then jump back on it for a sprint. Again, proceed with caution. You don't want to be a YouTube sensation by smashing your face on a treadmill because you've gone too quick. So just make sure that you're doing that safely. When you elevate your heart rate, you'll burn more calories, and that can boost your metabolism as well. So if you're doing, 8 minutes all the way up to 30 minutes of HIIT, such as sprints, rowing, cycling, alongside or after your resistance training 2-3 times per week, you can get your body fat levels down. As I said, this depends on the starting point. If you have a goal of pure muscle building and you struggle to put on size, you're going to do less cardio, less HIIT than somebody who has 20 pounds or 10 kilos of fat to potentially lose. So that's where the intensity can go up. My preferred method of this is merging the two things together. So you'll see in a lot of my programs, particularly the GAA Lean Body program, but also the BKF Online program, which is my non-GAA related program, I try and merge the two things together. So we get the high intensity element in terms of the recovery mixed in with the resistance training. So you'll have a circuit like spider push-ups and box jumps, where you're doing a certain amount of reps on spider push-ups and then you're going straight into box jumps. And then you might have a military or shoulder press sandwiched in between those two movements so that you're hitting both, and it's just a bit more of a time saver and can get you a very, I won't say quick because that's individual to the person, but a better bang for your buck in terms of time and hitting multiple goals in the one workout, so that you don't have to spend 40 minutes doing a resistance program and then 30 minutes doing HIIT and wasting time in the gym, when you could actually merge and put things together and save yourself 20 minutes in a session, which all adds up at the end of the week. The last one then is enhancing that performance either through endurance or stamina. So as a GAA player, endurance and stamina are vital for optimal performance, as you probably already know. So I am a fan, particularly in the off season, of incorporating aerobic exercises like, a treadmill or an outdoor run or swimming or cycling into your gym program. So this again will vary on where you come from as an athlete. Something that I've discussed with a lot of players, more so my inter-county guys. I work with less of them now, but back when I was primarily a strength and conditioning coach, I worked with a lot of inter-county players, and they would always say they fell onto one side of the bracket. Some players would lose their fitness very quickly, i.e. their aerobic fitness, but they'd keep all their strength. And other players were the opposite. They never really lost their fitness. They're what people would call naturally fit, but they'd lose all their strength and all their size once they stopped doing it. So I would offer to first ask yourself the question, which do you lose first? Do you lose your strength and your size, or do you lose your fitness? For example, I historically, for years, and even up until this day, never really lose my strength, and I never really lose my size. If I don't do any weights for a month, I don't really lose that much strength, or I don't lose that much size. A bit, but not much. But if I stop running for a week or two, it feels like I've never ran a day in my life. So my natural fitness isn't that high. So in the off season, I used to always prioritize higher intensity aerobic based work to try and maintain my fitness. So for me, it was more low impact stuff, cycling and swimming, but running was great too. So I have at the end of some of my programs a 3-kilometer run that players do, and it just stays on top of that base. So when they go back to preseason, they're not dying in the first 4 or 5 sessions. But again, your mileage may vary depending on your starting point, but that is something to consider. So if you're looking to enhance that endurance and stamina, you might want to look at 2 to 3 sessions per week, 30 to 45 minute sessions at a moderate intensity. And then you're not actually doing the high intensity stuff. You're just working for a kind of a steady pace. I like to use a RPE scale. So that's a rate of perceived exertion. A 1 is like rolling out of bed. A 10 is a flat out sprint. You're kind of aiming for about a 7. So that if you're on a run, you could hold a conversation, but it's challenging enough. Then when it comes to working with parameters, the main thing you need to know here is about repetitions, sets, rest between sets, and then progressive overload. And with reps, it's always going to be specific to a goal. You go lower reps, 1 to 5 for strength. You go moderate reps, 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 for hypertrophy and size. And you tend to go 15 reps or above for anything that's in that endurance realm. The sets then are the same. With a strength, you'll have a lot of sets. So you might have 5, 6, 7 sets, but the reps are lower. You're doing, 5 sets of squats or 5 reps of squats. If you have muscle building goal, it'll be splitting the difference. You'll have 3 to 4 sets. And then if you are going for endurance, you might just have 1 or 2 sets because the reps are so much higher. And then the rest again is the same. On a strength program, you want to have maximum rest. So you might be going up to 3, maybe even 4 or 5 minutes, depending on how heavy you're going in the workout and how many reps you're doing. If you're doing deadlifts for a 1 rep max, you might have a 5-minute rest in between. I'm not a fan, but as I mentioned, some coaches do it. 60 to 90 seconds in from hypertrophy and muscle building, and a little bit longer or a little bit shorter if you're just trying to get fitter. So you might have 30 to 60 seconds if you're doing a circuit style workout program. So again, play around with this. I tend to merge it depending on the client and depending on the person with the specific goal, but play around with those reps. And then finally, your progressive overload. So progressive overload is where you're gradually increasing the weight you're lifting so that you're keeping your body in a progressive you're moving your body in a progressive way in terms of the weight that you're moving. So let's say, for example, you started with 20 kilos on a bench press and you're able to do that for 8 reps with a 60-second rest. In 2 to 3 weeks, to progressively overload on that, you want to increase it to 22.5 kilos for the same sets, same rest, etc. So it keeps your body progressing. And alongside that, you can also get progressive overload by switching up things like tempo. So if you don't want to go too heavy, because what happens is you'll eventually plateau on a progressive overload, because otherwise you'd end up lifting 1,000,000 kilos if you were able to constantly progress and you were training long enough. So you adjust things like the angle or the tempo. So you go with slow negatives and explosive positives, i.e. a slow decline on a bench, and then you explode up 4 seconds, 6 seconds on the decline, 1 second, 2 seconds on the explosive, on the positive movement on the way up. Or you change up the angle. So instead of a flat bench, you go to an incline and you change up the angle. So there's a good few ways to progress on this. Any seasoned coach, and you can feel free to ask me as well on Instagram, there's lots of coaches out there who'll talk about this. You just switch it up so that you can keep your body progressing forward. So you can progressive overload in several different ways, but the most well-known is just increasing the weight as you go along. So in conclusion, crafting the perfect gym program as a GAA player does require balancing everything: your gym days, your workouts, your pitch sessions, your games, depending on the time of the year. So again, best practice is have yourself a 3, 4, or 5 day gym split. Make sure you're incorporating training parameters that are specific to your goals. So if you want to have a best of all worlds approach, you might go with hypertrophy at the beginning, you might go with strength and conditioning in the middle, and you might go with some high intensity interval training at the end if you're trying to get fitter, trying to build muscle, trying to lose body fat, if you're trying to do it all. So that's how you'll design it. Then adjust your nutrition alongside that so that you're hitting your protein requirements, you are getting the carbohydrates you need to fuel the sessions, and then your sleep and things that will help with your recovery. So that's a kind of summary of how you can potentially create a gym program if you're coming at this from zero. You can cut your learning curve by obviously working with coaches, myself or other strength and conditioning coaches that are out there, or performance or body composition coaches that are out there. But you can do this yourself. It just takes longer and you need to give yourself a little bit more of a runway of time. So that's everything from today's episode, crafting a perfect gym program for GAA players, maximizing strength, body composition, and performance. For more information on my GAA Lean Body program, I'll put that link in the description below. That's everything from me from this week's podcast. Catch you all next week.